sermon title says Jesus calls for fisher persons of organic, sustainable aquaculture. And you know that that's a reference to the fact that we live in a postmodern age when you've got to be politically correct with everything you say, lest, heaven forbid, you offend someone. And look at it. I make fun of political correctness, but in fact, for the most part, it's a really good thing because it tends to give a voice to the quiet and the weak person. It tends to be inclusive, and political correctness, for all of its weirdness, tends to create a better sense of equality than we had before. It goes overboard sometimes when we get really frightened and sensitive about stuff that's happening. For example, I'm sure you all laughed or pulled your hair out last week when you saw the news of Canadian cities banning tobogganing. And I think Rick Mercer did a wonderful piece on it just a couple of days ago with the new cop show called Toboggan Police. And they're interrogating this little kid and saying to him, "Now, you were driving that toboggan, weren't you?" And front. No, he says, I was only sitting on the back. And they said, oh, you little, and it was great. You can't even toboggan today. And I'm sure you also were horrified, I think last week as well, the story of the parents who are being investigated by the Children's Aid Society because they let their children walk home from school. Like, what, can you imagine a crime worse than that? And you say, well, what has happened to the world? Or the little kid that gets a bill because he didn't show up for a birthday party. We live in a really strange, complicated, weird world. And here we are, the church, and we must think to ourselves sometimes, how can we ever bring people into the church or even tell the message of the love of Jesus in this postmodern society where everybody is offended by everything that you do? The world has become too complicated. The church doesn't have a chance. And yet God is still saying to us, I want you to go and tell people the gospel and bring new people in. Whoa, God, what if we offend someone's sensitivities? The church, we're finished. And darn it, I'm so mad at the newspaper again. Yesterday's record talking about all the dying churches. Could they not come to St. Andrew's? I'll tell them. Come and see a church that's living, and to say that the church is dying, it's almost as if they want to say it. And they enjoy saying it. And they don't know what you know about the emerging church. That even though many congregations will die, other congregations are going to emerge in the 21st century and are going to grow and prosper. Anyway, it's about calling people into the church. And we look at the story in the first chapter of Mark about Jesus calling the disciples, Simon, Andrew, James, and John, down there on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And we might think to ourselves, well, it was really easy back then. Because life was so simple for those people. Just going down to the lake and casting your nets in the water and everything was safe and plain. Well, it wasn't. Life wasn't simple for Simon and Andrew and James and John. It was terribly complicated and difficult and weird, just like life is today. They lived in Bethsaida. They were a few miles from Caesarea Philippi, which was the main Roman stronghold in the whole province of Palestine. On their doorstep, there were 5,000 enemy soldiers. And at any moment, those soldiers could have come in and wiped out the little village of Bethsaida that had maybe 80 people in it. They were very close to the intersection of the two main thoroughfares of Rome, the Via Maris, the way of the sea, and the Via Regis, the way of the kings. They were living in the danger zone. And it's not as if they could look to the church in Jerusalem for any help, because the church in Jerusalem disdained them and thought they were backwoods nobodies. Life was complicated for those fishermen. Throw in the fact of hunger and poverty and disease, and the fact that their best friend John the Baptist had just been kidnapped by Herod and was about to be beheaded. So don't look at that Bible story and say, oh, life was so simple for those guys. Life was terrible. And it was as complex as it is for us today. But Jesus succeeded there. Jesus called people to him there. That means we can still call people into the church today in this time that we call the postmodern era. And I want to tell you what postmodernism is, because you are all postmodern people, whether you like it or not. Postmodern is what comes after modernity. And modernity is kind of ambiguous, but for a lot of the 20th century, we lived in modernity. That was a society that believed that modern technology and modern ideas were going to save humanity. Mechanization, medicine, democracy, science. We worshipped those things, and they were going to make everything better for us. That was the modern mindset. But here's the strange thing that happened. It didn't work. Modernity failed us. And none of those wonderful things happened, and we are still humanity struggling with pain and sadness and sorrow. Let me give you some illustrations. We thought mechanization would make life glorious for everyone. You imagine people living before electricity and mechanization, the daily routine of people having to cut firewood, having to go down to the river to scrub your clothing, having to do everything manually. But then the modern era came. The washing machine, the dryer, the vacuum cleaner, the electric stove, the car, the jet, the computer. And with each one of these we said, when we have all the mechanization, we're going to be living lives of quiet luxury. I remember when I was a kid in school, a major part of the curriculum was teaching us how to use our extensive leisure time when we were adults. It was a big worry. We were going to have so much leisure time, we wouldn't know what to do with it. But at the end of all the mechanization, what is the result? We are more busy. We are more stressed. We are more complicated. Nobody has a moment to spare. What happened? It failed. We thought that medicine would end all disease. And it has done wonderful things, but still, we struggle. And every person here has in some way been touched by cancer or heart disease. And every one of us lives sometimes in fear of that final great epidemic that's going to come and wipe out all of humankind. In the modern era, we thought that democracy would end war and poverty. But you know what war does? War is that machine by which the strong take away what belongs to the poor and the weak. But in the year 2016, we have heard just in the past week, we will shift to the point where 1% of the population of the world possesses 50% of all the world's wealth. Democracy, for all the good that it has done us, has largely failed us. We thought science would save us. We were all raised with Newtonian physics, and we understood how the whole universe worked, and everything was clear, and everything was certain to us, well, up until 1907, when Albert Einstein developed the theory of general relativity, and then all of a sudden, time and space and matter were not what we thought they were. And then when the German theoretical physicist Heisenberg studied with Niels Bohr at the university in Göttingen, and in 1927, observing the nature of the universe at an atomic level, came out of the university and he walked around the park in Göttingen with his head in his hands, saying to himself, how can nature be so absurd? When he realized that all of Newtonian physics was wrong. And he eventually published a paper that had at its core the statement, not only is the universe stranger than we think, it is stranger than we are capable of thinking. everything changed. Heisenberg. Although if you Google him today, all you get are references to Walter White and Breaking Bad. Heisenberg's observations revealed to us the frailty of modernity. Everything that we were taught is incomplete and messed up. That may be a difficulty. But on the other hand, for the church, the postmodern era might be the greatest blessing of all. Because this is what happens in postmodernity. It may create for us the greatest openness to the gospel of Jesus Christ that the world has ever seen. The same kind of openness that existed at the time of Jesus and the fishermen in Bethsaida. Because when all of the assumptions of science and all of the assumptions of modernity have crumbled around us and have failed, something happens to society that makes it receptive to a new idea. Postmodern people carry with them a massive amount of humility because all their assumptions have been proven wrong. Mechanization and medicine and democracy and science, for all the good they did not save us. The modern era was a lie. In much the same way that Rome lied to all of the little nations that it conquered, saying, if you will only join us, all your problems would be solved. That's what they had said to Simon and Andrew and James and John, and it all fell apart. Because on that morning that Jesus met with those 4 fisher persons, what was in their hearts were these questions. In light of what they had suffered and in light of the complexity of their life, they were asking, what is the meaning of life? And where do we go to find meaning and purpose and significance? And that's when the story of the birth and the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ starts to make sense. Because it answers questions that Rome in the modern age could not answer. It answers questions that are not answered by mechanization or medicine or democracy or science. What is the meaning? And postmodern people are deeply humbled because they have been failed. They are looking for something new. Postmodern people also carry within their hearts a tremendously healthy skepticism. And whoever thought that skepticism would be the friend of the church? Because people are always skeptical about faith, but now people have become skeptical about everything else. Skeptical about the idea that the government would look after them. Skeptical about the idea that modernity would answer all of their questions, and the question they're still answering or asking is, who will care for our souls? And nowhere else is there an answer. Postmodern people have within them a tremendous sense of tolerance and inclusion. They are ready to hear new ideas. Postmodern children are open and thoughtful and gracious. What Jesus offered to the fishermen by the shores of the Sea of Galilee is a dialogue about what is the meaning of life. Who will give us meaning? What is the nature of the universe? And so they risked everything and they went with him. Do not think that the call of those fishermen happened in a context or in a society that was easy or simplistic. It was just as complicated as our society today, and their lives were just as complicated as your life is. And for them to answer the call of Jesus required risk and danger and faith. But in the face and the context of a massive system, the Roman Empire that had failed them, they were ready for Jesus. And for us, living in the context of modernity, which has in some ways failed us, we are surrounded by people who are ready for something different and something powerful. Something that can only be told in his birth, in the beautiful light and simplicity that surrounds it, and in his life of compassion, and in his death on Calvary, and even in his resurrection, which of course is the antithesis of all things modern and scientific. But in the postmodern world that Heisenberg envisioned, maybe his death and resurrection are as sensible, or more sensible, than anything else. But I know this. We live in a world that is filled with fishermen. Fisher persons of sustainable, organic aquaculture. They are all hungry. They are ready to receive the love of Christ through you. And the church